You said you took risk management seriously. It's hard to believe that comment as it relates to the uniqueness of your bank. Your bank had about 90% of its deposits uninsured. If you're taking risk management seriously, as you grow from $50 billion to over $200 billion in a very short period of time, as a guy who ran a couple of businesses that went from zero to several thousand clients, the one thing I had to do was figure out how to get out of my business so I could work on my business. When you're the CEO, you're working in the business. It's very challenging to see your own blind spots. You actually need a board and the ability to step out of your role and look on your overall organization to come to a conclusion, where is the risk? And when your bank is such an anomaly in an industry where 90+% of your deposits were uninsured, how did you see that risk and then not respond to it? When you're a $50 billion bank, you don't have to worry about the stress tests. When you hit to $200 billion, you should be constantly aware of what a stress test looks like and how do you pass that test. And so it's hard for me to appreciate that you're taking risk seriously when, in fact, the anomaly itself should have triggered a different type of stress test in your own mind, in your board's perspective as well. So walk me through how you missed that, because that is core to what our nation has experienced in now having serious doubts about our banking system.
Senator, if I can make a few points. One is on the level of uninsured deposits. I've been at the bank, or was at the bank, for 30 years. And in my history, our clients have always had substantial amounts of cash. That's just the profile. So that's not something that happened in the last 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. It's always been that way. So we tended to have, and I think the ratings that were given to us by the regulators would show that we had substantial amounts of liquidity.
But that's good. Let me ask you this question, Ms. Becker. If you look back 20 years ago, what was the uninsured deposits 20 years ago, 15 years ago?
Senator, to my recollection, the deposits were always, uninsured deposits were always roughly between 85 and 90% of our balance sheet.
And the growth from 50 billion to 200 billion with that level of uninsured deposits did not trigger, or something could be different at all? So let me add this to it. So one of the things we have to do is learn to look outside of our industries for the anomalies that we may see within our industry. So when you see Reddit and GameStop having the type of fluctuation that leads to massive increase in value and then precipitous drop, looking around the world of technology and seeing that things are happening, how'd you factor all that in, or did you factor it in?
So, Senator, I think about it a couple different ways. One is our capital levels, and then our liquidity levels, and then just the advice and the expertise that we bring on board from other areas. That would be on the board, that would be on additional management team members, and then finally, kind of the last line of defense I would think about it would be the regulators. And so when I looked at the capital, and we included that in the written testimony, our capital levels, and I think there's questions about capital. And
I don't have any questions about capital as it relates to what happened. I have questions about liquidity, because capital really wasn't the challenge that you faced. You had a concern and an issue that, of course, manifested itself in liquidity risk because of 10 consistently increasing interest rates hikes that made your liquidity crunch a real challenge. So look at it from just the liquidity perspective.
Yeah, so to address that, and I'm just going to speak from 2021 all the way to the end of 2022, we increased the liquidity, and as I think about it, it's both the cash that you have and your borrowing capacity 300%. So at the end of the year, we had borrowing capacity of $69 billion, plus the cash that we had. You basically had liquidity of roughly $80 billion at the end of the year. And so, again, as we looked at liquidity overall, relative to the size of bank we were, we certainly felt that we had ample liquidity. And we're able to, even with the fastest bank run in history, 41 of the $42 billion of deposit outflows that day, that Thursday, were covered by SVB. And we could have handled even more. We were moving collateral from the Federal Home Loan Bank to the Federal Reserve. So the ability to cover that amount of liquidity or that amount of outflow, we certainly showed that we had ample liquidity. It's the unprecedented event, the fastest bank run in history. From our standpoint, that was the anomaly.
Thanks, Senator Scott. Senator Warner, Virginia's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr.